Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Kennedy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Procurement Express. You're very welcome along to the fifth in our sixth webinar series on procurement fundamentals being presented to us by Kala Dikibo. Before I introduce Kala, just some housekeeping. If you want to have a question you'd like to add in, you can just do it by adding, at the bottom, there's a little chat. You can also raise your hand. It's quite an informal little group, so you're very welcome to raise your hand at any stage, and you can either chat in your question or just pipe up yourself and we can have a chat. I'll be doing that as we go along. So you may or may not know Kala Dikibo is a procurement consultant and trainer with Telso. Kala has a great enthusiasm for everything to do with procurement, and every time I listen to him, I learn something new. And I've been selling procurement software for 7 years now. So I expect nothing less today. We're going to touch on the subject of supplier relationship management, and over to you, Kala. I'm looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James, for that introduction. Welcome to the fifth of six planned webinars on supplier relationship management. Last week, you may or may not have seen the recorded content we did on contracting with suppliers. If you've not had the chance to watch it, I suggest you do, because it gives a very good legal framework for understanding the relationship between a buyer and a supplier. And the session today builds on that, because we're talking about the relationship above and beyond what's in the contract and the obligations between both parties, and how by improving the relationships with certain suppliers above and beyond the contract, we can get more value out of the relationship for our business as well as the supplier's business as well. So in terms of what is supplier relationship management, SRM is a mutually beneficial two-way process in that it should improve the performance of both the buying and supplying organizations. It involves proactively developing relationships with particular suppliers. So, takeaway points on that definition. The first is that obviously it's between two parties, buyer and supplier. Also, it's about benefiting both sides, right? So it's a win-win outcome-based relationship. And the final point to think about is the last sentence there, which is to say, we don't have relationships with everybody, right? We have a number of suppliers that we work with, but because having a relationship or investing in a relationship is very resource intensive in terms of time, manpower, and so on, we have to select which suppliers to have those relationships with in terms of who we can get the most benefit from, right? So it's about selecting suppliers as well as making sure that it's a good fit in terms of getting benefits for both yourself and the supplier as well. Why is SRM important? The first thing is that, as I said, we can segment and evaluate our suppliers. Now, as I've just said, you have a number of different suppliers, I'm sure, in all your respective businesses, and we need to prioritize, right? Which suppliers do we believe we should invest time and resources into developing a relationship? And, whilst I'm on that, as we're talking about, supplier relationship management, there's a lot of similarity towards your own personal relationships. So a lot of things we're going to be talking about today, also try and think about personal relationships you have, and you will find that a lot of the same ingredients go into building a commercial relationship as to what you have with your personal relationships. The first thing we need to think about is segmenting and prioritizing which suppliers we're going to have a relationship with. It's a good idea to think about spend, who we spend the most money with in terms of our suppliers, and that will give you some idea of how you can prioritize your suppliers. By having supplier relationship management, we can also find improvement opportunities. So the basis of a relationship means there's going to be communication, and through that communication, both you and your supplier can work together to try and reduce waste in terms of maybe delivery times or any processes that are wasting time and slowing down your delivery. By communicating and working together in that relationship, you can improve that. Cost reduction, again, through looking at the processes in your own organization as well as the supplier's organization. Greater use of automation, for example. that can reduce costs and mean that you end up paying less for your supplies from your supplier. Stable pricing. Through a relationship, by both parties understanding what to expect of each other, there's more predictability. And when you have more predictability in a relationship, you don't get companies or you don't get suppliers whacking on big premiums because they're not sure when you're going to order again from them. So if you have a relationship with a supplier, one of the things you'll talk about is future forecasts. How much volume you're going to buy, when you're going to buy it, and so on. Those kind of conversations that happen within the relationship give the supplier confidence when they come to price the product or service that they're supplying you. If they have no idea when they're going to hear from you next, potentially there's a temptation to build in a premium into their pricing, and you end up paying a lot more than you should be. And finally, it promotes the use of technology. So one of the key parts of a relationship is communication. Through various software applications, communication can be enhanced, particularly around the area of supplier visibility. Some of you may or may not have systems that allow, or software that allow your suppliers to actually see what's happening in your own company in terms of inventory. So if you can give suppliers visibility of your own inventory stock levels, they can go ahead and order a new batch without waiting for you to send them out a new purchase order. That saves time, and that creates a lot more commitment between both parties because you're sharing information with them, and that will generate a lot of trust. So using technology can promote a relationship through streamlining communication and making it a lot more easier for both parties to have visibility about what they're both up to at any particular point in time. In terms of relationship foundations, again, you can think about your own personal relationships as well as your commercial relationships. Relationships are based on quality of interaction. Relationships are a series of interactions and encounters with the other party. The question is, what is the outcome of those series of interactions? Do you come off feeling more positive from your interactions with the supplier, or do you come off feeling more negative? If you come off feeling more positive from your interactions, you're likely to be a lot more collaborative going forward. So if you have a good meeting with a supplier and have further subsequent good meetings, that relationship's going to grow. Whereas on the other hand, if you have meetings or interactions with suppliers and they don't get off on a good footing and there's a lot more animosity, shall we say, between yourselves, potentially that's going the other way and leading your relationship into a conflict zone. So the quality of interaction, building rapport with your suppliers and vice versa, and some other areas such as trust. If you trust your supplier or your supplier trusts you, what that's going to mean is you're more likely to share information. A lot of suppliers have a lot of information about what they supply you. Their willingness to share that information to a large extent is based on how much they trust you. If they believe that any information they share with you, you're going to use it to your advantage and try and squeeze them, they're not going to share that information with you. Whereas if they have an element of trust in the relationship, they are more willing to share information about features on a particular product, about different ways a service can be applied, because they believe through that trust, you're not going to take advantage of them. You're going to treat them fairly in the way you price. So building that level of trust can bring benefits. Transparency. In any relationship, being open, being honest, keeping to your word is very fundamental to a relationship. Again, as I've just said, using technology can also help promote transparency. If you give suppliers visibility, think about suppliers submitting invoices, for example. Through technology, they can track what's happening to that invoice, whether it's been approved by your side, when it's going to be paid out. And that removes any sort of anxiety that the supplier may have about when they're going to be getting paid. So through using software applications, that can allow for greater transparency and promote the communication that goes on in a relationship without you actually having to come face to face and have that, communication about what's actually going on with the invoice. Commitment refers to a willingness to carry on in the relationship. In any relationship, again, you can refer to personal relationships. In any relationships, commitment is key. Without commitment on both sides, it's not going to work. So both parties need to be committed to the relationship. Once one party stops being committed for whatever reason, again, that is a recipe for the relationship to fall apart. More interestingly, also, when one party thinks the other party is not being as committed as they should be, that's likely to make them not be committed as well. So, what that requires is open and frank discussion, the ability to listen to the other party, take feedback, take on board what they say, and that will breed some level of commitment, and the relationship will prosper. And finally, mutuality or mutual benefit or reciprocity, I should say. Both parties, for a relationship to be run well and be sustainable over a long period of time, there must be some benefit that both parties are extracting. If just one party is extracting all the benefit, it's not a recipe for a long-term relationship. There must be mutual gain, sharing information on both sides, sharing profits from any growth through any endeavors you've done together will support mutual benefit and allow the relationship to continue. So these are the foundations around any relationship, be they commercial or personal for that matter. In terms of supplier segmentation, as we said earlier, we've got to choose. Most of your companies, you will have a number of different suppliers, in the tens, hundreds of different suppliers. Just like your own personal relationships, you have to invest time into those relationships. You have to invest some level of resources into those relationships. And you can't afford to do that to everyone. You simply don't have the bandwidth to do that. So as I said earlier, you need to prioritize which suppliers you're going to have these relationships with. So using supplier segmentation, you may or may not have heard of the Kraujic matrix. This allows us to think about who we're going to prioritize those relationships for. And it runs along the lines of two criteria. The first is the importance to the organization of the item being procured. So, in all your organizations, you need to think about, which items, which services are fundamental to our business in terms of what we deliver to our customers. Without these supplies or inputs, we will struggle, or we would not be able to carry out our role as a business and provide our customers what they require. Those items are something that need to be prioritized. The second criteria is the complexity of risk, the complexity or risk of the supply market. So when we think about those supplies that are critical to our business, what we also need to think about is what challenges do we have in the supply of those products or services to us? What level of risk is there of supplier failure? In other words, we don't get supply of that. Where there's a high risk of supplier failure, those are the suppliers or the categories of supply that we need to develop relationships with. Because if we can develop relationships with suppliers where there's a lot of risk around their supply, we can start mitigating that risk. If you don't build closer relationships with those suppliers, the risk is going to increase. So these are the criteria we can use to start prioritizing which suppliers out of the many suppliers that we have to have a relationship with.
I was just going to say, Mariska, who's on the webinar here, reaches out to all of our customers frequently. We do something called a QBR, quarterly business review. And, not all of it, we have hundreds of customers, not all of the customers want to take it up, but it's a very good example. Many of our customers are making that best practice. They've decided that, yes, you know what, it's worth investing once a quarter to sit down with us as a procurement software provider. It gives them a chance to influence, what we do next. Inevitably, the people who come along and talk to us, they get, we listen to them more. That's just the way it is, because we build a relationship with them as well. It's really nice, especially for us. I mean, we are more or less a kind of fairly commoditized, but we're not a huge spend for most of our customers, let's put it that way. But even though we're not a huge cost center, we can have a positive impact for our organization. So if there are any customers on the call today, just Mariska will surely be reaching out to you at some stage, and I recommend that take up that chance. Maybe if you think, because it has other benefits, we can improve the product better to your needs. Inevitably, you get a bigger share at the table. So there's other benefits, even if it's not just to do with pricing or invoicing. It can be the whole development of the product as a whole.
Yeah, very much so. I couldn't agree more. And from your client's point of view, the more they can communicate what their own customers are telling them, that can affect what they're telling you in terms of your own service delivery and what, how you can adjust your service to meet their own customers' needs. So yeah, it's fundamental. I couldn't agree more. I think you said it very well. In terms of types of risks to assess for a relationship, again, what we're looking at here is where the risk is higher, that's where we need to develop relationships with suppliers. Because by developing those relationships, we can start having a dialogue of mitigating those risks through, brainstorming and working collaboratively to find solutions to these risks that are out there. So the first is that of supply risk, so supply chain risk. We've all gone through a global pandemic. There's been a significant, monumentally, some may say, disruption to global supply chains. So it's really about having relationships with suppliers who can help us mitigate disruptions in those supply chains. One of the things that's happened, or one of the things that's come out of the pandemic, is those businesses that had very good relationships with their suppliers have been able to ride out the pandemic a lot better. And that's generally because if you have a good relationship with your supplier and your supplier is saying to you, look, we have really low stock, we're not getting as much stock as we normally get from, let's say, China, we've only got a limited amount of stock. Based on the fact that they have a good relationship with you, that limited amount of stock, they're likely to put your way, right? Because they have an ongoing relationship with you, and they put a lot of commitment into that relationship. So when they're thinking about, okay, this limited stock that we have, amongst all the clients we have out there, who are you going to give that limited stock to? Right? The chances are they will give it to whoever they've got the best relationship with, whoever helped them when they were in a sticky situation, right? So there is, the pandemic has shown that there is, a tremendous amount of benefit, particularly around ensuring you get your supplies in by having good relationships. As I said, those who had good relationships with their suppliers going into the pandemic have been more resilient in terms of, getting the supply they want. Those who haven't had good relationships, when they're going to those suppliers who, have limited stock and asking for supply, that supplier is simply saying, sorry, we haven't got any stock, even though they have limited stock who they're giving to someone else who they have a good relationship with. So thinking about the supply chain of those critical items, and not just your supplier, but your supplier, and so on, building relationships with those suppliers helps mitigate the risk around supply. Supplier risk essentially is saying, look, whoever we have a relationship with, we need to think about how financially sound they are. What level of competence do they have? It's no point having a relationship with a supplier who, yes, it's in a critical category, but they don't live up to the standards that you need from them. So you have to do an element of pre-qualification when you're thinking about a supplier to have a relationship with, just as they will do some pre-qualification on you. That's the nature of a relationship. Environmental risks, so things like political risk, new legislation coming in, adverse weather. In the UK now, there are various flooding, storms and things that go on that affect supply. Roads are damaged, train tracks are damaged, and so on through the weather. As a result, there's tremendous amount of disruption. Where you have those external environmental factors, as I said, political, legal, and so on, again, you need to think about building relationships with those suppliers to try and mitigate that risk and manage. Okay, it's hurricane season, or it's flooding season. How are we gonna work with our supplier to mitigate any potential risks against flooding that will disrupt transportation and delivery of goods? Demand risks. So demand risks look at things like commodities. Ultimately, again, using the pandemic has been a very good example. A lot of businesses have had fluctuations in supply, and there's been a very good example around in the UK, the clothing industry. A lot of the big high street clothing retailers, their garments are manufactured in Southeast Asia, particularly Bangladesh. And what happened is when the lockdown came last year in March and all the high street shops had to close, they immediately cancelled orders they had with the manufacturers in Bangladesh. And when I say cancelled orders, you're talking about orders that were already on the ships on their way to the UK to be delivered. And a lot of these high street retailers cancelled those orders, even though they were on their way to the UK already. So, and that was all stemmed because the demand for, clothes in the UK dropped because all the stores were closed. So they simply just cancelled their orders. But it had a knock-on effect. So you cancel the orders with the manufacturing companies in Bangladesh. They don't have any money. They ended up getting rid of, making redundant all their staff. And if you think, and you may or may not know this, but Bangladesh, 95% of their exports is from garments, exporting garments. So it's a really big industry in Bangladesh. And when all their manufacturing plants had their orders cancelled, they simply sacked all their staff or made redundant all their staff. And there was a big sort of, ethical thing, because these are innocent workers who have been laid off because of disruptions that happened in the UK. As far as the relationship is concerned, that, between the UK high street shops and the manufacturing plants in Bangladesh, that relationship was shattered. And let's face it, as soon as the lockdown, or as soon as the shops reopened, these same stores are going to need those manufacturing plants to start producing again. All well and good, these manufacturing plants will start producing again, but they're going to start whacking on premiums because they're not sure if, a few months from now, these UK clothes companies are going to cancel orders again. So by, if you like, treating the manufacturers not so well by cancelling orders and not honoring contractual orders that you had with the manufacturers, you've broken the relationship. And the knock-on consequence from that is your future relationship is going to be based on mistrust. There's going to be premium pricing from the manufacturer. So anything you do order, they're going to put a margin on top just to cover any costs of potential cancellations and things like that. So you now find yourself in a predicament where you're paying a lot more. Financial risks as well. The cost of items go up. So let's think of in Europe, for example, gas prices have gone up because of scarce. There's not enough storage and there's high demand for gas. So all suppliers that rely on gas to power their supply, their prices are going to go up. So how do you manage that? Having a relationship with a supplier allows you to at least have a dialogue with them to say, okay, we know your prices are going up. How can we work together to minimize the shock in terms of your increase in pricing? You may decide to spread it over a long period of time because they trust you and they know you're going to order over a long period of time. Those are the kind of things that can happen when you have a relationship and a channel of communication. If you don't have that, then you're just going to face the shock increase in prices. Supplier preferencing. So far we've talked about the buyer side, how buyers choose suppliers and so on. Supplier preferencing is the other point of view. It's saying, what do suppliers think of their clients? I don't know any of you out there, whether you know what your suppliers think of you as a customer or as a client. Do they think highly of you? Do they not think highly of you? Anyway, this supplier preferencing model allows us to understand what suppliers think of us. As I said at the start of the session, relationships are two-way, right? It's all well and good us saying we want to have a relationship with a supplier. If they don't want to have a relationship with us, there's nothing there for a relationship. So using this model, which looks at two criteria, it looks at the size of the business a client is giving to a supplier, and it looks at the attractiveness of the client or the customer or the buyer. And attractiveness refers to a number of things, such as, do you pay invoices on time? If you don't pay your invoices on time, suppliers are not going to be, you're not going to be attractive to suppliers. If you constantly change your expectations or your specifications midway through production or through supply, suppliers are not going to be too pleased. So you're not going to be attractive to them. So, we could take it from the bottom left. If the size of your business to a supplier is relatively small and they're not attracted to you, as far as they're concerned, they're going to look at you as a nuisance, right? They don't want your business. If the size of your business you're giving them or potentially giving them is quite high, but they're not attracted to you, they're going to try and exploit you. So again, they're going to whack on a premium to what they would normally charge to take advantage of the fact that they don't like you. If you don't award them the contract because they're too expensive, they didn't like you anyway, so they're quite happy not to have your business. But if you do go ahead with them, you're going to pay a lot more because of that, the fact that you're not attracted to them. Top left-hand corner, relatively small amount of business, but they're attracted to you. They're going to look at you as a development client, And that's, that's the start of them thinking about having it or wanting to have a relationship with you if you wanted to have a relationship with them. Top right-hand box is core, high value, contracts you're giving to them, as well as them being very attracted to you. That's sort of, key for a sustainable relationship. So one of the questions I'll like to leave you with is to think about, what do your suppliers think of you? And also, where do you think your suppliers would put you in this quadrant? And that can trigger you into trying to improve that, because it's not static. If they don't think highly of you, you can change that, but you need to know that first. So how do you become a customer of choice? How do you make yourself attractive towards suppliers, and they prioritize you? If they have a limited stock, they give you things like paying your invoices in a timely way. Yeah, and again, having software software that gives visibility, so it allows suppliers to be able to track what's going on with their invoices, reduces their anxiety and allows them to know that they're going to get paid, as opposed to when you just go radio silent and they don't know when they're going to get paid. That makes you unattractive as a client. Communicate expectations. So your specifications need to be clear. There shouldn't be any ambiguity. It makes the job of a supplier a lot easier when they know exactly what you want. They can price it accurately, and they can actually, make sure they meet your expectations. The worst thing is if they're not sure what you want through ambiguous specifications, they deliver it to you, or they supply the service and you turn around and say, well, that's not what we wanted. Again, that doesn't make you attractive to a supplier. Consolidation of spend. We spoke about, I think it was the first webinar where we talked about consolidating your spend. If you can consolidate your spend, so rather than having 10 suppliers, you bring it down to just one supplier, you're going to have a lot more, the contract size is going to be a lot higher. And therefore that's going to make you attractive to the supplier. Early supplier involvement. You may or may not have heard this phrase, but early supplier involvement essentially means getting a supplier into your procurement process as early as possible, not just waiting until it gets to the tender stage, but even when you're developing the specifications, get them involved in helping you think about the specifications. Obviously, be careful that they don't lead you into a direction where they're the only people that can supply you. But what we're saying is their expertise at an early stage when you're doing your specifications can help you develop your specifications in such a way that you minimize risk, and you minimize any excess features that you don't actually need. So early supplier involved, and from the supplier's point of view, if they feel that you're bringing them in early in the procurement process, they're going to respect the fact that you're opening up to them, and they're going to reciprocate in the same manner by sharing very valuable information that they probably wouldn't share with other clients. Sharing objectives, by having your objectives aligned. So, having an objective for good quality, having an objective for sustainable products, for example, again, is likely to increase your attractiveness on the side of the supplier. Growth, any growth that happens as a result of your collaboration, share the profits. Have some sharing ratio, but have some way of giving back. As I said at the earlier slides, the only way you're going to make a relationship last long is when there's mutual benefit. If they share all the information with you and you end up making loads of profit, but they don't see any of it, that relationship can't last. Risks as well, for that matter. So in terms of finding a supplier, how do we identify a supplier, and what are we looking for once we've looked at the categories of supplier that we want? There's a graph here from PwC which talks about procurement professionals that they asked what they should be looking for from suppliers. Delivery, can your supplier, whoever you want to enter a relationship into, can they deliver? So you have to do some pre-qualification. Are they competent? Do they have the capacity, for example? They should have efficient production or service processes to ensure that they are minimizing waste throughout their own production. So therefore they pass on those cost savings to you. They should be flexible. James earlier mentioned being responsive to changes in demand. How flexible are your suppliers? If you say, look, actually our customers are saying that they want more sustainable products, how responsive can your supplier be to start, delivering more sustainable products and services for that matter? The quality of products, that's very important. Again, through your pre-qualification, you can assess What level of quality do they have? Do they meet international standards that if you're exporting, they may need to meet international standards or local standards for that matter? Are they consistent? These are criteria that you'll look for in a supplier in terms of wanting to have a relationship with them in that particular category that you've identified as a priority. On the right-hand side, less so. So, the people that were interviewed did not think that integrating systems with a supplier mattered as much. But what they didn't talk about, which I think is also interesting, and again, I'll throw a question to you, which is to say, how many of you, when you tender to, to suppliers, how many of you actually asked to know who will be running the contract on the supplier side? So who will be the contract manager or the salesperson on their side, who you'll be having regular contact with once the contract gets up and running? And that's a key thing, because ultimately the relationship is going to be based on who you're going to be dealing with on the supplier side. So you want to know whether that person you're dealing with on the supplier side has the requisite skills, has the requisite experience, even, analytical skills, problem-solving skills, because in a relationship, you're going to have challenges, you're going to have problems around risks and so on. What's their ability to problem solve and actually come up with solutions that can help you? So when we're looking at suppliers, rather than looking at just, things around delivery, quality of products and things like that, it's also worth asking the supplier, okay, who's going to be your contract manager? Who are we going to be dealing with on a regular basis? What level of experience do they have? Are they able to problem solve? Because we are going to have to problem solve throughout this contract. So again, that should be a criteria that you should think about when choosing a supplier who you work with. It's interesting, I do some work with a number of organizations in the UK. And when I asked them about, how do you get on with your suppliers? Most of them say it depends who we're talking to. There are different people within, there are different people that they come into contact with on the supplier side. Some people they get on with who they find very professional. Other people who they deal with on the supplier side are not very professional and they don't get on with them. So the relationship fluctuates depending on who they're dealing with. So it's very, it's actually a very important thing that sometimes is missed, who you're actually going to be dealing with and having an idea of who that person will be. Challenges to supplier relationship management. So one of the big challenges is it's a natural business instinct to think cost reduction and have a short-term focus. So of course, cost reduction leads to value, and yes, we want cost reduction, but you can only reduce costs so much. And sometimes short-term cost reduction prevents long-term potential benefits, such as the ability to continuously improve. Right? That's a long-term endeavor that demands resource for both parties to sit down together and problem solve and think about how to improve their processes and the quality of their products and services. If you're always thinking about cost reduction in the short term, and you're saying to your suppliers, look, if you don't reduce your costs, we're going elsewhere, in terms of relationship, in terms of a long-term relationship, it's not conducive because there's nothing left on the table after you've asked them to reduce their costs for you to invest in terms of resources into more long-term value-added endeavors, as I said, such as continuous improvement, such as sustainability, such as innovation. Innovation doesn't come through no investment of resources. So if you've taken everything off the table in the short term by getting them to reduce their costs, there's no chance of getting those long-term benefits that will sustain the relationship around, sharing information, innovation, new technological advances and things like that. So one of the challenges to long-term relationships is that constant short-term focus on cost reduction. Yes, we should have cost reduction, but there's a limit before you start taking away potential long-term benefits. Skills requirement. Increasingly, procurement professionals, finance professionals, we need to broaden our skill set. And as far as relationships are concerned, we need to think about influencing, we need to think about leadership, change management, mediation, team building. Now, these are all separate training sessions that I'm more than happy to discuss and to talk about with you. But these are some of the skill sets that you require above and beyond your general procurement skills and procurement process skills. You also need to think about these more soft skills that can help develop and promote a long-standing relationship. Another challenge is the difference between objectives. So you're a farmer, you're a hunter. One party may be thinking about long-term, the other party may be thinking about reaping the benefits and consumption now. And obviously they're incompatible objectives. I don't know how many of your companies engage in supplier relationship management, but from statistics, not many do. Some that do it very sparsely, others don't do it at all. But if you are thinking about doing it, there's going to need to be some level of transformation to get your business to start thinking about supplier relationship management. So it's about the stages around transformation, creating a sense of urgency, coming up with a business case where you quantify what the benefits of supplier relationship management are, as well as the challenges. Shared vision, so make sure you communicate a vision about what you intend to achieve through supplier relationship management. Executive sponsorship, make sure senior directors and so on are involved in driving and championing supplier relationship management in your business. That's how it's going to succeed. Resource allocation, there needs to be a certain level of time, manpower allocated to developing supplier relationship management in terms of building those relationships with those suppliers. Start small, identify one particular category, identify one supplier within that category, and almost use that as a pilot to develop your supplier relationship knowledge. Train your stakeholders. I've just given you some areas that need, stakeholders need to be trained on around leadership, influencing, team building, and so on. And finally, track and communicate progress, right? What we're saying here is that all those quick wins that happen as a result of, implementing supplier relationship management, remember, you may get some resistance. People are going to say, well, why are we bothering with this? Let's stick to what we normally do, etc. Your ability to communicate quick wins on the back of supplier relationship management will build momentum and further motivate stakeholders to carry on in that direction. And finally, benefits of supplier relationship management. Again, this is sourced from PwC. They asked a number of procurement professionals, and they came up with more efficient processes. So by working together, you can strip out all the excessive time delay that happens in that procurement delivery process. You can make sure that, value analysis, make sure everything you're doing has a purpose as far as delivering the goods and services that you need. Reduction in inventory, again, if we have closer relationship with our suppliers and we can start, planning, we can start sharing forecasts with them, that gives them time to plan and deliver as and when we need it. So therefore, we don't need the inventory or large inventory to cover any shortfalls. Improved customer satisfaction, again, I think James alluded to it, by being responsive to customer needs. And we are responsive to customers' needs through our ability to talk to our suppliers and say, look, this is what our customers want now. They want to be more sustainable. Let's think about being more sustainable. By delivering that sustainability to our customers, that increases customer satisfaction, that potentially drives market share. More sustainable products, again, we've just had COP26. This is the now, as it were. How can we work with our suppliers to start being more sustainable in how they acquire their own inputs, right? So, renewable power, minimizing waste, recycling, and so on. And that takes collaboration. If you don't tell your suppliers that you want them to be more sustainable, they're just going to keep, selling you the same thing. So actually, the buyers have a big control over what suppliers do. So it's very important to communicate that need to be more sustainable, because obviously that's what your clients want as well. Improved on-time delivery by our suppliers, again, through sharing forecasts with your suppliers. They can predict when you need stock or replenishment. Again, as I said to you earlier, some companies have, share software that allows a supplier to see your own stock level. So as that stock level is coming down, they know their lead time, so they'll start, without you, generating purchase orders and internal approvals and so on, they will start sending you new deliveries, and that increases the chance of on-time deliveries and so on, and reduces your need for large inventory. Better access to market. So again, we talked about standards. By working with your suppliers to build their standards so they hit the ISO standard, for example, that allows you to export to markets which demand ISO certification for any products coming into their country. I think that's it. So thank you very much. Feel free to ask me any questions you have on supplier relationship management. There are quite a number of things we've talked about there, particularly around soft skills, trading and things like that. We can develop some content on that if you'd like us to. But yeah, thank you very much. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Kala. We'll see if any questions come in there. I mean, this really reminds me that, you know, you're only as good as your supply chain in many industries. Yeah. And although sales teams are obviously built to try and sell us products, I think it can cut both ways. You know, I certainly know that over our development at the beginning, we had certain key customers like UNICEF, Keller Logistics, Boys and Girls Club of America. And, you know, when we were getting at different stages of our development, we offered them tons and tons of value because we were fairly on in our product development cycle and was very, very happy to do it. But we gave them thousands and thousands of dollars of value in terms of custom requirements that we did for them because we were trying to get going and, you know, we're trying to keep them happy. And I think you can, if you can, of course, you can't do it for the people who are, you know, delivering the toilet roll, but for certain items, you can just identify, listen, which supplier, like a good action, I think, from this webinar will be to note down which 3 key suppliers that if you really enhanced your relationship with, could make a strategic difference to your business, you know, for all the reasons that you've laid out there, you know. Yep. Maybe bring them for lunch, you know, let's see what turn things around here. And if you do, I guarantee those suppliers they'll be amazed and you'll be the #1 customer straight away, and you will definitely get the benefits from it. I see it because everyone has their kind of favorite customers. We certainly kind of do. We shouldn't. Other kids, it's like having a favorite kid, I guess. But if you pick out, you know, which suppliers they are and say, okay, listen, I'm just going to once a quarter call that guy, not when I want something, but just set up the relationship or maybe keep them up to date with what's going on. I think that would be a great action for our attendees to come along to take away from the webinar.
Very much so. Yeah, I agree.
So this is the 5th of 6. We're coming into the final session next week. We will be continuing to roll out more content into the new year, but we're taking a break for Christmas. But next week, we will have a webinar specifically on ethics. So maybe, Kelly, can just give us a quick preview on the ethics.
Yeah, ethical procurement, very topical at the moment, both from a professional conduct point of view to the environment, being sustainable, and about the conduct of organizations, looking after your suppliers, modern slavery, and making sure that we eradicate modern slavery from our supply chains. So yeah, we'll be talking about a number of ethical points.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll see you next week. Same time, same bad channel. Thanks very much for our attendees for coming along. We had a lot of attendees actually this week. So thanks a million, guys. And please send us your emails. Tell us what sort of content you want to see. If you have questions, of course, if you're a customer Procurement Express, you have access to Kala on a one-to-one basis for complimentary consultation to do with the software or not. Any issues you want to bring up, he's a very knowledgeable guy, and I recommend you take advantage of that. And until next week, we'll look forward to seeing you all again, and have a great week.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.